single shot, and a memory splintered forever. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. Share where you're tuning in from. Your voices make this journey richer. Now let's uncover the truth. When the doorbell rang at exactly 10:01 a.m., I was halfway through a second cup of coffee and just far enough along in the day to resent any surprises. Fritz was humming in the kitchen, slicing a perfectly respectable fig torte, and Nero Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, communing with his orchids like a man on a mountaintop retreat. I answered it. The man who stepped into the vestibule was tall, handsome in the tailored rich kind of way, and carried under his arm a black leather folio. His gray eyes moved around the brownstone's front hallway like they were checking off a mental list. Parquet floors, checkerboard tiles, original banister, and a guy named Goodwin in a well-cut suit who wasn't in the mood. "Mr. Nero Wolfe?" he asked. "Upstairs, pollinating Phalaenopsis. You'll have to make do with me." He gave me a look that said, "You'll do, but barely." "I'm Nathaniel Brodsky. I was told this was the place if one wanted to hire a mind that doesn't come cheap." "You were told right," I said, stepping aside. "But I should warn you, Mr. Brodsky, if what you've got in that folio is a divorce petition, a missing Siamese cat, or anything involving movie rights, you'd do better down the street." He smiled thinly and walked into the office like he'd been invited. "None of the above. It's about a bullet. And a photograph." That earned him a raised eyebrow from me. "Well now, that's got just enough intrigue to be annoying." He opened the folio and slid a photograph across Wolfe's desk. It was an 8x10 glossy black and white, the kind you'd expect to find framed on a law office wall or stuffed in a box marked Harvard 98. It showed 5 people, dressed to impress. 4 men, 1 woman, all seated stiffly around a dinner table. One of the men had his hand raised mid-toast, and in the center of the image, right through his chest, was a circular hole surrounded by spiderwebbed glass. Brodsky tapped it. "That was on my wall when I came into the office this morning. The photos from 12 years ago. I haven't seen most of those people in nearly a decade." "And the bullet?" I asked. "Still in the plaster behind it. I left it there. I called no police. I came here instead." That was when Wolfe entered. I heard the elevator before I saw him. The soft mechanical whir, the click of the gate, and then he emerged, black silk robe, canary yellow shirt, and the look of a man who had been interrupted on religious grounds. Wolfe made it halfway into the office, saw Brodsky, glanced at the photograph, and stopped. "I do not accept clients before lunch," he said, and started to retreat. "I'm aware," Brodsky said smoothly. "But you might want to hear the rest." That stopped Wolfe's exit, which in the context of his usual inertia was like halting a glacier mid-slide. Wolfe moved to his chair, lowered himself like a descending battleship, and steepled his fingers. "You may proceed, Mr. Brodsky." Succinctly, Brodsky nodded. "My name is Nathaniel Brodsky. I'm a civil litigation attorney. Last night, someone fired a single round into my office wall. They struck a very specific target. That photograph. And not just the photograph, but the image of one man in particular, Arthur Lang." Wolfe tilted his head slightly. "And Mr. Lang?" "Dead," Brodsky said. 6 weeks ago. In a boating accident in Connecticut, or so I thought." I sat up a little. "You think it wasn't an accident?" "I think someone is trying to send a message, but the real trouble is this. Arthur Lang wasn't the only person in that photo with a secret, and whatever killed him might be aimed next at me." Wolfe closed his eyes. "And the police?" "I don't want them involved. Not yet. Not unless I'm forced to be posthumously cooperative." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Why?" "Because," Brodsky said, tapping the photo again, "I don't know who fired the bullet. But I know why. That picture, those 5 people, aren't who they appear to be. And someone wants to keep what happened that night buried." He looked at Wolfe dead on. "I want you to dig it up first." Wolfe didn't answer, not with words anyway. He glanced at the bullet hole again, then looked at me. "Archie, compile background on each individual in the photograph. Names, professions, current whereabouts. Begin with the deceased. Mr. Brodsky, give him what you know. Be thorough. Then go away and do not call me unless you are shot at again or arrested." That was as good as a handshake in Wolfese. I pulled a notepad from my jacket pocket. "Mr. Brodsky," I said, "let's start from left to right. Names, dirt, and any scandals you're willing to share before I find them myself." He hesitated, just for a second. Then he began. I didn't know it yet, but that photograph was a time bomb, and the bullet that shattered it was only the beginning. Brodsky gave me the names like he was peeling off layers of old wallpaper, reluctantly and with some damage to the paint underneath. He rattled them off in order, starting with the woman. First on the left is Marianne Kessler. She was the only non-lawyer in the group, art gallery curator back then. She was dating Arthur Lang at the time, though they kept it low profile. Next to her, seated, Lawrence Dean, partner at Rothman and Dean, ruthless, brilliant, and about as warm as a frozen tax form. Then Lang, you know about him. To his right is Elise Varga, real estate developer, very private, very rich, very sharp. Last is me. He paused, like he expected Wolfe to be impressed. Wolfe was not. He simply waved 2 fingers and closed his eyes, which was his signal that I was to handle the rest unless something involved ancient Greek or liver pate. I escorted Brodsky to the door and promised we'd be in touch, probably sooner than he'd like. When I got back, Wolfe was pouring beer with the kind of care a surgeon reserves for separating conjoined twins. "You believe him?" I asked. "I believe," Wolfe said, "that he is frightened, and that he intends to stay ahead of whatever is behind that photograph. That makes him both useful and dangerous." "Useful for the checkbook," I said. He grunted. I accepted the case because the disruption was surgical. The shooter was not reckless. He chose a target and punctured it with precision. That is not merely a threat, it is a performance, and such performances are rarely solitary. That was Wolfe's version of "something smells funny." I took that as a green light and made myself scarce to chase down our cast of characters. I started with Marianne Kessler. Her gallery was on Madison, wedged between a boutique that sold $900 scarves and a cafe that spelled coffee with a K. The kind of place that looked like it cost a lot just to inhale. Marianne herself was tall, composed, and wore a black turtleneck like it had been tailored to match her cheekbones. When I introduced myself, she gave me a look that belonged in the Louvre, glacial, expensive, and a little bored. "I haven't spoken to Arthur in years," she said when I brought up the photograph. "I didn't even know he'd died." "That makes 2 of you," I said. "But someone else noticed, and they're getting nostalgic with a firearm." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you police?" "No, but I clean up after them sometimes. You were dating Arthur Lang, weren't you?" "I was," she said. "Briefly. Until he stopped pretending he wasn't already married to ambition. Arthur believed everything had a price tag, including people." "You still close with anyone in that picture?" "Not especially. Elise I see at events occasionally. Lawrence Dean I avoid on purpose. And Brodsky." She made a small noise, like a fly had landed in her wine. "He was the charming one, which is often another word for manipulative." I asked her where she was last night. She didn't flinch. "Opening night for a Romanian photographer. Hundreds of guests. Try harder, Mr. Goodwin." I left with a few polite words and a business card that smelled like sandalwood and avoidance. Marianne Kessler might not have pulled the trigger, but I got the sense she had the emotional range to hire someone who would. Next up was Lawrence Dean. I called his office and was told by a secretary named Corinne that Mr. Dean does not accept unannounced visitors or surprise interviews. I replied that I wasn't offering either. I was offering a chance to explain before someone did it with a .38. That got me 10 minutes at 5 p.m., provided I brought a tie and didn't breathe too loud. Dean was waiting in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and contempt. He was lean, silver-haired, and spoke like he'd had a long-term affair with his own IQ. "You're working for Brodsky?" he said. "I suppose everyone must make a living. You two don't do Christmas cards?" He gave me a tight smile. "Let's say we differed on the value of integrity. Nathaniel Brodsky was always 2 inches away from disbarment and 3 steps ahead of an ethics complaint. He made it a point of pride." I showed him the photo. He barely glanced at it. "Do you remember the dinner?" I asked. Of course. That was the night Arthur made his grand proposal. Proposal. Lang wanted the 5 of us to go in on a firm. Cross-disciplinary, legal, real estate, art consulting. He saw synergy before it became a buzzword. Did it happen? Dean snorted. Number Elise backed out first, then Marianne. I refused because I had a career, not a midlife identity crisis. Brodsky stayed too long at the table. And Lang? He was furious. He thought we owed him loyalty because he dragged us through law school bar tabs and baby scandals. But loyalty and leverage aren't the same thing. I pressed him about his whereabouts last night. He gave me an alibi involving a private poker game in Riverdale and at least 6 witnesses, none of whom owed him money or liked him much. I thanked him, left, and made a mental note. Of the 3 so far, Dean had the sharpest mind and the coldest hands. He'd shoot if it were legal, maybe even if it weren't, but only if the fallout had a memo attached. By the time I reached Elise Varga's townhouse on the Upper East Side, the day was beginning to feel like a very elegant minefield. Elise greeted me herself, wearing a robe the color of clean cash and an expression that suggested she'd already researched me. "I knew someone would come," she said, letting me in. "I just didn't think it would be so soon." "You heard about the shot?" Number Y heard about Arthur's death, and then Marianne sent me a message. Very vague, very tense. I assumed something was about to surface. I showed her the photograph. She stared at it longer than the others had. "He always did enjoy being the center of attention," she murmured. "Even in death." I asked her the same questions. About the dinner, the people, the reason the dream fell apart. "Elise," I said, "did something happen that night?" She paused. "Yes," she said finally. Something was said, a confession of sorts. Arthur hinted he knew something about all of us, that we were all vulnerable, that he'd been keeping receipts, metaphorically. "And you?" I got up and walked out. I never liked being reminded I had weaknesses. She wouldn't elaborate, but when I asked where she was last night, her lips curved slightly. "With a man I trust who doesn't carry a gun. Shall I give you his number? Only if he serves drinks." It was. After 7 when I got back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the dining room, fork in one hand, napkin like a flag of war. Fritz had made coq au vin. I gave Wolfe the rundown while he ate. He listened without a word, only twitching his lip when I mentioned Arthur's little confession. When I finished, he looked down at his plate. "Mr. Lang may have died by accident, but he lived with intent. The photograph, the gathering, the bullet, they're all fragments of a play he began, and someone else has decided to finish." He looked up at me. "Tomorrow, you will visit Mr. Brodsky again. He has not told us everything, and we must know what it is, before someone else decides we don't need to." Wolfe speared a mushroom and took a bite. "And Archie, do not, under any circumstance, allow yourself to be photographed." The next morning I called Brodsky and told him we needed to talk again, not on the phone, face to face. He tried to play cagey, offered to clarify things over lunch at the River Club, but I shot that down flat. I wanted him where I could see the tension rise behind his eyes without the benefit of buttered rolls and a maitre d'. Wolfe preferred I conduct the meeting in our domain, neutral ground under orchid-blessed jurisdiction, but Brodsky was skittish enough that pressing him into the brownstone again felt like too sharp a corner this early. So we compromised. I met him in his office. It was one of those sleek, high-rise affairs with brushed steel, custom lighting, and furniture so modern it looked like it didn't want to be sat in. The photograph had been removed from the wall, but I could still see the small, faint cavity where the bullet had embedded itself. A round, tidy scar in the drywall. Brodsky's desk was large, his chair was leather, and the smile he gave me didn't fool me or itself. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "I take it something's developed." "Something always develops," I said, "when you leave parts out. Let's make this easy. What exactly did Arthur Lang know about you and the others?" Brodsky's smile tightened. "You don't waste time." "I waste Wolfe's time. That's more dangerous." He looked past me, out the window at a skyline I doubted he really saw. Then, slowly, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim black folder. "I wasn't lying to you," he said. "But I didn't tell you the full truth either. Arthur had leverage on all of us. The photo wasn't just a memory. It was a map. To what? To a night none of us wanted to revisit. And Arthur made it clear, over dinner with wine and charm and that smug little glint in his eye, that he still had the original receipts. Not literal paper, but records. Notes. A file. He kept it in a safety deposit box somewhere. He told us as much. Said we'd appreciate his generosity in keeping it sealed. And what was in it? Things. Nothing criminal, but reputational, career-ruining in the right light. Affairs, deals, statements made under influence. It wasn't blackmail, not exactly. Arthur didn't want money. He wanted relevance. Insurance. Legacy, Brodsky said. He didn't want to be forgotten. He wanted to be remembered as the man who could destroy 5 lives but chose not to. His idea of control was elegant until he died. And now someone's worried the insurance policy is about to mature. Exactly. I flipped the folder open. It held summaries, typed, of the 5 individuals. Not just resumes. These were bullet points of behavior, vulnerabilities, and mistakes. Some of it lined up with what I'd already gleaned, but there were details in there I hadn't dug up yet. Marianne Kessler had sold a forged painting in her early career and kept it buried with a combination of silence and carefully paid favors. Lawrence Dean once helped suppress evidence in a civil case. Technically legal, morally gray. Elise Varga had used insider knowledge to win a zoning approval years ago. And Brodsky himself? He'd drafted a fraudulent contract clause that cost a non-profit its land. Accidentally, he insisted. But he'd signed it anyway. Lang had known it all, and kept it. "Do you know where this deposit box is?" I asked. Brodsky shook his head. Number, but he left behind an assistant. Woman named Joy Linwood. She worked with him for 5 years. If anyone knows. I stood. Where can I find her? She used to live in Tribeca. I'll text you the address I have. She left the firm after Arthur died. Quietly. No forwarding number. Got a photo? He tapped on his phone, then held it up. I took a look. Young, dark hair, thin smile, sharp eyes. The kind of person who notices when someone moves a stapler an inch to the left. I'd say thanks, I told him, but I'm trying to cut back on lying. Back outside, I texted Wolfe a quick summary. His reply was one word. Careful. Always comforting. I headed to Tribeca. The building was one of those brownstone walk-ups that had been tastefully renovated within an inch of its charm. Joy Linwood's name was still on the mailboxes, but there was a piece of masking tape over it. The kind of detail a landlord forgets, but a paranoid tenant wouldn't. I rang anyway. Nothing. I waited. Rang again. Still nothing. I was turning to leave when I noticed the door open 2 floors up. A woman in jeans and a hoodie stepped out onto the landing, looked down, saw me, and paused. I called up. "Joy Linwood?" A beat. "Yes." "Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe." Another beat. Then quietly, "Come up." The apartment was spare but neat. Bookshelves, a clean kitchen, and a faint smell of citrus cleaner. She offered me a seat, but not coffee. I didn't press. "I figured someone would come," she said, sitting across from me. "I just didn't think it would be a detective." "Technically, Wolfe is the detective. I'm the legs. You found me." It wasn't that hard. What I want to know is whether Arthur Lang left anything behind. Something locked away. A file. A box. Joy looked down at her hands. "He did. He told me to keep it safe. Said it was for memory, not money. I didn't open it." "But you know where it is?" "Yes. And no, he split it. Literally. One part went into a safe deposit box in his name, but the key and the box number, he mailed those to himself." "Excuse me." "Just before the boating trip. He told me he'd sent the envelope from a post office upstate. Registered mail. It was supposed to arrive a week after he got back. But he didn't come back. Number. And the envelope never arrived. Or if it did, someone else got to it first." That sank in. "Have you told anyone else this?" "No one asked." I stood. "You're going to have to tell Wolfe. Today." She looked at me. "If I do, am I in danger?" "If you don't," I said, "you might already be." I left her with a promise of protection Wolfe hadn't technically authorized yet, and headed back uptown, replaying her words. Lang had planned this. Some kind of slow fuse legacy trick, but someone else had gotten wind of it and wanted the past to stay sealed. By the time I walked into the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, a glass of beer untouched on the tray beside him. I gave him the report. He said nothing for a full minute, just stared at the carpet like it was narrating history. Then, "This is no longer about a bullet. It is about leverage. Memory weaponized. We must find that envelope before the next fragment arrives by mail or by gun." Wolfe didn't speak again for several minutes. He closed his eyes and steepled his fingers, which I'd come to recognize as the meditative posture of a man threading needles no one else could see. I stayed quiet, letting him line up whatever invisible chessboard he'd started assembling. Finally, without opening his eyes, he said, "You're to return to Joy Linwood first thing tomorrow. Retrieve any correspondence Lang sent her, emails, letters, receipts, envelopes, scribbles. Anything that might offer a location or a reference point. The envelope he mailed to himself, was that her exact phrasing? She said he mailed the key and the deposit number to himself. Registered mail, sent from upstate, supposed to arrive after he returned from the trip that killed him." Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at me as if I'd just confirmed his worst suspicion. He meant to retrieve it personally. "Exactly. So if someone else intercepted that envelope, yes, they either had access to his mail or knew enough to stop it from arriving altogether." He grimaced. "Which means the list of suspects shrinks again, to those who knew of his intentions beforehand. Which, from what Joy told me and Brodsky confirmed, is the original 5. Lang said it at the dinner. That photograph marks the evening he told them all." Wolfe grunted and picked up his beer, finally sipping. "The file is real, the photograph was a signpost, and the bullet a warning." "To who?" "To the rest," Wolfe said. "To keep quiet. Or perhaps, to keep away." That last word hung in the room like stale smoke. I didn't like where this was going. A dead man playing puppeteer from beyond the grave was one thing, but a living someone using his absence to clean house? That had teeth. The next morning I was at Joy Linwood's by 9:15, coffee in hand. She looked more rested, but no less cautious. "I've been thinking," she said before I could even sit. There might be one more thing. She disappeared into her bedroom and came back with a slim white envelope, unsealed but unopened. This arrived 2 days after Arthur's funeral. I never opened it. It had no return address, and by then I was already out. I figured it was condolence junk. But it was mailed to my name. Here. You think this might be part of it? I took the envelope and carefully pulled out the contents. There was a single index card, neatly typed. Lang lives in shadows. The key is where he hid from the light. Ask the shutter. Not signed, not dated. I stared at it for a long beat. He sent this. She shook her head. No idea. That's not Arthur's style. He didn't do riddles. Anyone else get one? Not that I know of. Maybe the others didn't keep theirs. I made a mental note to ask every one of them again. Do you know what it means? Ask the shutter. She hesitated. There's one thing. Arthur had this storage unit in the Bronx. He called it his photography cave. He kept old cameras, film, negatives, hobby stuff. It had a blackout curtain over the interior. No windows. He said it was where he hid from the light. That ring a bell? It rings a bell, blows a horn, and waves a red flag. She found the address scribbled on an old utility bill and handed it to me. I was in my car and on my way within 10 minutes. The facility was one of those quiet, unassuming cubes along the Harlem River, rows of metal doors and numbered units under cheap sodium lights. The office manager, a balding guy named Tim who looked like he moonlighted as a roadie, was suspicious until I mentioned Lang's name and produced a copy of my license. He used to come by once a month, mostly nights, always carried his own lock. Gave me a good tip for staying out of his business. How long's it been since he last showed up? Tim scratched his head. 7 weeks? Maybe more. I handed him a 20. Let's see the unit. Lang's unit was near the back, number 39F. It had a dual lock set up, but Tim had a master for the outer latch. He popped it, then stood back. The interior was orderly. Row of metal shelves, several darkroom canisters, camera bags, tripods. Dust settled evenly across the tops. It hadn't been touched in weeks. I took my time. It was a silent kind of space, the kind that felt deliberately curated to be dull until it wasn't. One shelf held several manila folders labeled with years and cryptic tags like VERA, ELKWALK, and CIRCLENOIR. Inside were photographs. Black and white, mostly architectural, some people, a few blurry like they'd been taken in a hurry. I took snapshots of the folder's contents with my phone and kept moving. Then I spotted a square safe box tucked behind a black and white enlarger. Heavy. Locked. Not bolted down. The kind of thing a guy like Wolfe would call a cipher's coffin. No key, but taped to the side was a photograph. I pulled it off gently. Another image of the original dinner party. Same evening, same table, but from a different angle. And this time, it had something the first one didn't. A mirror behind Arthur Lang's head, slightly off-center, reflected in it just faintly, was the blurred silhouette of someone standing with their back to the camera. They weren't part of the group. They were behind the photographer, watching. Whoever it was, they weren't supposed to be there. That was enough for one day. I left the unit undisturbed, got Tim to log the visit under Authorized Records Review, and headed back to Wolfe. Wolfe had just finished lunch and was dabbing his lips when I laid the photograph and the cryptic card on his desk. He picked up the photo and squinted. That, I said, tapping the faint silhouette, is someone who didn't RSVP. Wolfe didn't speak. His eyes were fixed. Not on the figure, but on the mirror. Get Saul Panzer, he said. Now? Now. Have him trace that reflection, enhance it, compare it to the known suspects. That person is our next fracture point. And if Lang intended that to be seen, then he was playing a game far deeper than we imagined. He paused. And Archie? Yeah? Make sure you aren't followed. I didn't waste time. Within the hour, Saul Panzer was sitting in Wolfe's office, his expression the same unreadable calm it always was, like he'd just walked through a room where someone had screamed and left without blinking. He took one look at the photograph and nodded once. Give me 48 hours, he said. Maybe less. Time, Wolfe muttered, is not a luxury here. It is the one currency our adversary spends more wisely than we do. Saul didn't flinch. Then I'll take 36. He left, and Wolfe didn't say a word for nearly 5 minutes. He just stared at the mirror in the photograph like it owed him rent. When he finally spoke, it was with that edge in his voice he gets when he's already 10 steps ahead, but isn't quite ready to share the route. Mr. Lang's manipulations were never spontaneous, Wolfe said. He staged that photograph not for nostalgia, but for provocation. And this silhouette, this presence behind the camera, it was not an accident. Either someone he allowed or someone he failed to account for. That is the fulcrum. And the safe? I asked. You think it's the real deposit box? A decoy? Neither. It is bait, but not for us. That gave me pause. You think someone else already found it? I think, Wolfe said, lacing his fingers, someone else has been waiting to see if we would. It was a deeply Wolfe-style paradox. You find a clue, and that clue finds you back. That night, he retired early to his orchids. I stayed in the office, flipping through digital copies of the photo folders I'd taken. Most were landscape shots, some were candid photos of the original 5. Brodsky, Kessler, Dean, Elise and Lang. In more relaxed, off-guard moments. Drinking wine in a yard, sitting on folding chairs, one even at a beach. One caught my eye. It was Elise Varga in profile, holding a glass, mouth open, mid-sentence. In the blurry background, half in shadow, was a figure I couldn't quite place. The body language was off. Too upright. Too still. I tagged it for Saul. The next morning, Wolfe summoned me early. Telephone call, he said. At 7:43 a.m., anonymous. A male voice. He stated, the key is already in play. You're being followed. Drop the safe or pay. Then he hung up. No caller ID? Of course not. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together, his voice neutral. You will retrieve the safe. You just said it's bait. Precisely. But we must play our part. Bring it here. Use discretion. If followed, double back and circle. If challenged, abandon the car and do not engage. This is not a cowboy melodrama, Archie. We are not bulletproof. Which, coming from Wolfe, was the closest thing to, I don't want you shot, he would ever say. I called a favor from Fred Durkin and borrowed his panel van. By late morning, I was at the storage facility with a pair of gloves, a blanket, and a crowbar that Fritz had helpfully labeled 4 vegetables. Tim didn't ask questions when I flashed credentials and a forged transfer note Saul had drawn up. The safe was heavy, compact, and unassuming. I wrapped it, heaved it into the van, and drove a weaving route back through the city like I was running a milk route for ghosts. I checked for tails, twice, and saw nothing. If someone was following me, they were better at hiding than I was at spotting. That was either comforting or the opposite. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had already cleared space in the front room. Fritz grumbled about dangerous things near my pantry, but retreated when Wolfe offered to deduct time from the orchid rotation instead. We placed the safe on a side table beneath the window and left it untouched. Wolfe wanted it to sit there like a spider in a corner, silent, visible, and slightly unnerving. That afternoon, Saul returned. He had 2 photographs printed and 1 question, ready. Do you know a man named Barry Tyne? I blinked. I know the name. Tech venture guy, real estate, Some security investments. Wasn't he Elise Varga's fiancé at one point? Saul nodded. 6 years ago. Broke off quietly. But he was also Arthur Lang's shadow investor in a side business. You won't find it in records. It was held under a shell based out of Cayman, but Arthur funneled money through it to pay for some quiet favors. What kind of favors? People who delete things. From public record. Court records, medical files, police logs. People who make identities blurry. He handed me the photographs. That's Barry. In the mirror. Reflected. And again, this time in Lang's beach photo, standing too far behind the group to be social. Wolfe took the prints with a pinch, like they were radioactive. It would seem, he said, that Mr. Tyne's investments went beyond financial. Saul wasn't done. And one more thing. The mailing records. I tracked Lang's upstate trip, the one where he said he sent the envelope to himself. No such mailing was logged under his name. But there was one listed under a private courier service. Hand delivery, Manhattan only. It was addressed to Joy Linwood from someone listed only as Post 5. You know what that means. Wolfe answered before I could. Military. Post 5 is code for off-record handling. Likely ex-intelligence. Saul nodded. Tyne's name is connected to a private firm staffed by former intelligence analysts. He knows how to bury things. Or retrieve them. Wolfe let out a breath, slow and deliberate. Then the bullet wasn't a warning. It was a reset, a purge. The photograph is being sanitized, its history erased one subject at a time. That quieted the room. Finally, Wolfe looked at me. Bring Miss Varga here. No calls. In person. Tell her it's a matter of consequence. And Archie. Yeah? Be disarming. But not disarmed. By the time I reached Elise Varga's townhouse, the clouds over the city had thickened to the color of second-hand ink. I was buzzed in without a word, which was either trust or carelessness, and found her in the same silk robe she'd worn the first time, except this time it was belted tighter and her hair was knotted up like she'd been preparing for a siege instead of a visitor. You didn't call, she said as I stepped in. Neither did the bullet, I said. Nero Wolfe wants to see you. Now. Her gaze held steady. What changed? You're not safe, I said. And neither are the rest of your dinner guests. Lang's ghost is more active than most people's social calendars, and someone's cleaning up after him with a pretty serious broom. She crossed to the window and looked out, her arms folded. You're saying someone's targeting us? Number, I'm saying someone already did. Lang set a fuse, and now that he's gone, someone else is trying to burn the rest of the line before it reaches the powder. She didn't respond, just stared out at the street as though she expected something to crawl out of it. I kept going. We found the safe, Lang's little trove. We haven't opened it yet, but we've got a nice picture of who's standing behind the curtain. I pulled out the print Saul had handed me and offered it to her. She took it with a dry, careful grip, like she knew what was coming. The second her eyes hit Barry Tyne's silhouette in the mirror, her face didn't change, but the knuckles on her left hand did. White. Gripped. I hadn't seen that man in 3 years, she said quietly. Except now we know he was there that night. Lang caught him in the glass. Arthur liked mirrors. He said they caught the truth people turned their backs on. Then you'll like what Wolfe has to say, I told her. You're coming. She didn't argue. She changed clothes in less time than I thought a woman like Elise Varga knew how to manage, and we were in a cab 15 minutes later, heading uptown under a sky threatening to spill. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair. The safe sat where we'd left it, quiet and squat like a small, disapproving guest. Fritz was nowhere to be seen, and Saul had vanished again, probably out chasing one of Wolfe's whispers. Elise stepped inside like she'd entered a courtroom and crossed the rug to face Wolfe without waiting for an invitation. You have something you want to tell me, she said. No, Wolfe replied calmly. I have something I want you to tell me. She blinked, but didn't move. I circled around behind her and took my usual perch near the bookshelves, ready for the show. You knew Barry Tyne was at the dinner, Wolfe said, not a question. Lang placed him there deliberately. You saw the reflection. You saw the photo. I saw the photo, she said, but not then. Not until now. Lang mailed it to you, Wolfe said. No. Then he told you he took it. She said nothing. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. For him, that was a lunge. Elise, this is not a parlor game. Lang anticipated his own death. Perhaps not in form, but certainly in consequence. He knew his leverage would outlive him. So he built a mechanism. This photograph, the safe, the riddles. He knew someone might come for his secrets. He knew someone would. Elise sat down. Her legs had gone stiff. I saw her jaw flex. Arthur told me, she said at last. 1 week before he died. He told me Barry had been there. That he'd followed him, maybe even planted a microphone. That Barry was worried Arthur knew too much about the shell companies he used to clean up messes. Arthur said if anything happened to him, I should look for the mirror. That's all he said. Just find the mirror. Wolfe nodded slowly, satisfied. And you didn't think to share this before now? Would you have? She snapped, then immediately caught herself. I was scared. I didn't know who I could trust. Arthur always played things so close. And then the shooting started. Wolfe tapped the safe gently with the edge of his cane. What's in this? He said. We'll decide whether we proceed or retreat. If it is what I suspect, a ledger or worse, a dossier, then the next move will not be ours. It will be theirs. Mr. Tyne or whoever operates behind him. I want to see it, Elise said. You will, Wolfe replied. But first, we must determine how much Mr. Tyne already knows, and whether he believes we're ahead of him. I was about to ask how we were supposed to determine that, when the phone rang. Wolfe picked up. Yes. His face didn't change, but his fingers clenched around the receiver. After a moment, he said, Thank you, and hung up. That was Saul, he said. Fred Durkin just reported an attempted break-in at the storage facility. Unit 39F. The lock was tampered with. Whoever it was didn't get far, but they were looking for something. The safe, I said. Wolfe nodded, which means they didn't know we had it. Elise stood, tense. Then what happens now? Wolfe's eyes moved to the clock, then to the window. Now, he said, we make it known that we have the key, and that we intend to use it. I looked at him. And how exactly do you plan to do that? He smiled, thin and grim. You'll deliver a message, Archie, not written, not recorded, just whispered loud enough in the right place. You'll go see Marianne Kessler. You'll mention, in the most casual and traceable way possible, that the contents of Arthur Lang's safe are in our possession and that a meeting has been arranged with the police. Do not elaborate. Do not press. Bait, I said. Wolfe inclined his head. And net. And the meeting. There is no meeting, Wolfe said. But they won't know that. If Barry Tyne believes the secret is about to be exposed, he will act. And when he does, we will finally know what he's trying to erase. Elise's expression had shifted. There was fear there now, yes, but also something colder, something calculative. If he comes for you, she said quietly, he won't miss. Perhaps, Wolfe replied. But if he comes here, he will fail. Then he closed his eyes. Archie, go whisper in the right ear, but do so quickly. The next move will not be subtle. The only thing more delicate than slipping a lie into someone's pocket is making sure they know it's a lie but still act like it isn't. That's what Wolfe wanted. And that meant Marianne Kessler. It was late afternoon when I made my way back to her gallery. The sun was low and bruising the sky over Madison Avenue, and the wind had picked up just enough to make my coat collar a suggestion rather than a shield. I stepped inside to the scent of polished wood and deliberate lighting. Marianne was talking to a couple in their 60s about a metal sculpture that looked like a bent fork doing yoga. She saw me, gave a practiced smile, and nodded toward the back room. I waited. 2 minutes later, she joined me, arms crossed, head tilted just enough to communicate that her patience came on a timer. "You again," she said. "Me still," I replied. "This won't take long." "Good, because I have a showing in 20 minutes and your particular shade of trench coat isn't on the color palette." I smiled. "Then I'll keep it brief. You were right. Arthur Lang had more planned than just nostalgia. Wolfe found his private safe, contents intact, and, big surprise, they're not just photos of garden parties and drunk legal grads." Her face didn't change, but she blinked once. I could almost hear Wolfe muttering, "Subtle. Excellent." I leaned in just slightly. "We're handing it over to the police tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Wolfe says if the world's going to burn, better to light the match ourselves." She hesitated for just a breath. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Lang trusted you, and because you deserve to know before the rest of the press starts drooling on your resume." I turned before she could ask anything else. I didn't want to give her time to poke holes in it. I left the gallery with the satisfying suspicion that she was already reaching for her phone before the door shut behind me. I drove straight back to the brownstone, took my usual winding route to shake any tales real or imaginary, and stepped into the hallway just in time to hear Wolfe's voice from the office. "Was expecting you 10 minutes sooner." "I was being deliberately sloppy," I said, shrugging off my coat. "It sells better that way." Wolfe grunted and tilted his head toward the safe. "Fritz found fingerprints on the back handle. Let me guess, Lang's number and not Elise's. Saul is confirming them." I walked in fully, closed the door behind me, and dropped into the red leather chair. "You think Kessler will play her part?" "She already has," Wolfe said. Saul intercepted a text from her assistant's phone, an encrypted message sent to a disposable number tied to a burner phone purchased under the name Arvid Lang. "That's bold. It's also sloppy, which means whoever is behind the cleanup is getting nervous. Mr. Tyne may be prepared, but he is not patient." There was a long pause, filled only by the hum of the radiator and the faint scuff of Fritz in the kitchen. I looked at the safe. "You still don't want it open?" "Not yet. Let them think we will open it. That is more valuable than any knowledge it might contain." We waited. Evening crept in slowly. Wolfe remained in his chair. I fielded 2 more messages from Saul, one confirming that the burner number had pinged again near the East River, the other that Fred had spotted a dark SUV parked across from the brownstone twice in the last 3 hours. At 9:18 p.m., the doorbell rang. I stood and looked at Wolfe. He didn't move. "You know what to do." I nodded, walked to the door and opened it. 2 men stood there, one tall and blank-eyed in a charcoal coat, the other short, nervous, and trying to look tough in a beanie that didn't belong to winter or crime. "Mr. Goodwin?" the tall one asked. "That's the name," I said. "Yours?" They didn't answer. "Of course," I said. "Come to ask politely, have you?" They stepped inside, wordlessly, glancing at the hallway and then toward the office door. "We'll take it now," said the short one. "I'm sure you would," I said, stepping back toward the coat closet. "But I'm afraid you missed your appointment. Wolfe's already locked the contents away." The tall one moved toward the office. That was a mistake, because the moment he passed the threshold, Wolfe spoke. "Stop." It wasn't loud, but it had weight. The man froze. "You will leave," Wolfe said, "because you are not killers. You are sent to threaten, to recover something your employer failed to prevent being taken. But you are not murderers, at least not tonight." The tall man turned, his hand twitching under his coat. Wolfe's eyes didn't move. "Do not. Archie is behind you. He has a revolver. Yours is empty. You were told not to escalate." That landed. The tall man hesitated. Then he turned to me, expression tightening, and walked back to the hallway. The short one followed without a word. I opened the door for them. "Gentlemen," I said, "next time, try calling first. We've got a very full calendar." They left. No threats, no glances back. I shut the door, locked it, and exhaled. Wolfe's voice drifted from the office. "They will report failure." I walked back in. "And that failure will force a hand." "Precisely. Tomorrow they will either vanish or double down. I'm betting on the latter, but we must be prepared either way." I looked at the safe again. "Do we open it now?" "No," Wolfe said. "We open it in front of them, when all 5 suspects are present." "Including Tyne?" "Yes, especially him." Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "Call Saul. Tell him to arrange a gathering. Noon. Here. We will give them the ending Lang intended, and deliver the reckoning someone else tried so hard to stop." He paused. Then added, almost gently, "Archie, this is where it ends, or begins again." By 11:42 the next morning, the office was set. Chairs arranged in an even arc around Wolfe's desk. Curtains drawn just enough to let the light fall where he liked it. The safe, unopened, polished with a rag Fritz had muttered over for 10 minutes, sat dead center under the window like a sleeping sentinel. Wolfe was seated, of course, the only one allowed the comfort of stillness. He had chosen a rust-colored tie, an unsubtle jab at the idea of decay dressed up as style. I was at my post by the bookshelves, not quite looming, not quite distant, just visible enough to remind everyone we were watching. The guests arrived one by one, summoned not by polite invitation, but by the pointed suggestion that not attending might be interpreted as a confession in absentia. Elise Varga was first, as expected, composed, unshaken, but not untouched. She took her seat without speaking. Then Brodsky. His nerves showed around the eyes, tight, scanning. He nodded to me like we were back in court. Defense and prosecution unclear. Next was Marianne Kessler. She arrived with a look that said, "I have better things to do," but her eyes didn't leave the safe. She sat across from Elise and crossed her legs too quickly. Lawrence Dean arrived fourth. As always, he came with the scent of certainty and aftershave, the type of man who hadn't prepared a single apology but had half a dozen justifications ready in case of a jury. Last, Saul escorted in Barry Tyne. That one got Wolfe to sit up a full half-inch in his chair. Tyne was sharp, steel-gray suit, clean-shaven, watch that whispered digits and wealth. He didn't look at the others. He looked only at Wolfe and once at the safe, briefly. When everyone was seated, Wolfe closed his eyes and breathed once through his nose. Then he began. "You are here," he said, "because Arthur Lang believed none of you could be trusted. Not individually, and certainly not together. He held evidence, a record of indiscretions, betrayals, compromises, and he kept it under the delusion that possessing the truth was equivalent to controlling it. It was not." No one interrupted. Lang's death left a vacuum. Someone, one of you or someone close to one of you, has spent the last several weeks attempting to erase that truth. First by staging a break-in, then by firing a single shot through a photograph that Lang himself had staged. A performance, one you all were part of, willingly or not. He gestured slightly toward the safe. This, whatever it contains, is not valuable because of what it holds. It is valuable because of what you believe it holds, and someone in this room has killed to ensure its contents remain buried. A murmur, but no words. I stayed where I was, watching. No one stood. No one confessed. But the temperature shifted when Wolfe turned to Barry Tyne. "You were there that night," he said, though not as a guest. Tyne didn't blink. "Prove it." Wolfe gave a small smile. "I do not prove, I reveal." He lifted a manila envelope from his lap and opened it. Inside were the prints. Lang's mirror photograph, the beach shot with Tyne just barely in frame, and the delivery log Saul had tracked down, linking the courier to Post 5. "These were Lang's breadcrumbs," Wolfe said, "and you are the crow." Still, Tyne didn't move. "I didn't shoot him." "No," Wolfe said, "but you tried to shoot what he left behind." He turned now to the others. "And the rest of you, Kessler, Dean, Brodsky, Varga, you all knew. Maybe not the details, but enough. Enough to know that Arthur Lang was not content with fading into a footnote. He wanted immortality, and so he painted it in guilt." Kessler shifted in her chair. "You're saying he blackmailed us from beyond the grave?" "No," Wolfe said sharply. "He trusted you to fear exposure more than you feared him. But someone else saw that differently." He nodded to me. I stepped forward and bent to the safe. I'd taken the liberty of retrieving the key from Wolfe's vault earlier. With a small click, the safe opened. Inside was a stack of papers bound in twine, a flash drive in a sealed envelope, since something that made all the air go still. 5 identical manila envelopes, each labeled with a single name. Elise, Marianne, Lawrence, Nathaniel, Barry. I pulled them out and placed them on Wolfe's desk one by one. "Lang," Wolfe said softly, "was methodical. He left each of you a mirror. Yourselves, as he saw you, and he left us the choice of what to do with that truth." Dean stood now, agitated. "What is this? You plan to blackmail us?" "No," Wolfe said. "I plan to do nothing. I will give each of you your envelope. You may read it or destroy it. What happens next is yours to choose." Marianne's voice was thin. "And the flash drive?" "That," Wolfe said, "contains a recorded statement from Lang, addressed to the NYPD. Unopened. It was meant as a safeguard in case the contents of these envelopes ever surfaced without his consent." Brodsky leaned forward. "So it's over?" "No," Wolfe said. "Now it begins. Because someone in this room still fired that bullet. And if it wasn't meant to silence Lang, then it was meant to warn the rest of you." Tyne stood. "You don't have enough." "I don't need enough," Wolfe replied, "because the police will have more than enough once the fingerprints on that safe match the ones we collected from the gallery door. You were sloppy." Silence. Then, "I never touched it," Tyne said. "And yet your gloves were found in the alley. Your phone pinged 3 blocks from the gallery, just an hour after the photograph was destroyed. Saul confirmed it. You came not to retrieve the truth, but to erase it." I stepped closer, slowly. "This is the part where you sit back down, Barry. Or the part where I make a call." He didn't argue. He sat. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, breathing once more. "You each came here today believing you might bury something. Instead, you found yourselves inside it. Lang's truth was not a weapon. It was a mirror. If you break it, you only bleed." One by one, they took their envelopes. No words, no cries, just silence, sharp and unnerving. They filed out, all except Elise. She lingered at the threshold, looking at the flash drive still on Wolfe's desk. "You'll destroy that?" she asked. Wolfe closed his eyes. "No." She nodded once. Then she was gone. When the door closed behind her, Wolfe turned to me. "Mr. Goodwin, burn the contents of the envelopes, not the drive. The truth must be preserved, but not wielded." I gave him a look. Lang wanted his leverage to live. Wolfe raised his brows. "And it has. Long enough to serve its purpose." He leaned back, finally at ease. The bullet shattered the photograph, but it didn't destroy the image. Then, without another word, he reached for the bell. Dinner was served. The dining room was warm with the scent of Fritz's veal blanquette and the soft clatter of polished silverware. Wolfe settled into his chair like a satisfied judge after a long trial, said nothing for the first 10 minutes. He ate with deliberate focus, each bite measured, each pause thoughtful. I, for one, had questions to ask, but I knew better than to wedge words into the silence while he was weighing sauce viscosity with philosophical reflection. When his plate was half cleared, he looked up. "That went well." "That went tense," I said. "You made 4 high-powered professionals feel like high schoolers in the principal's office." "Precisely," he replied, cutting a mushroom with the precision of a surgeon. "They came expecting confrontation. Instead, they received reflection." I stabbed a bite of veal and leaned back. "Let's say I'm playing devil's advocate. Lang leaves behind incriminating information. Someone tries to erase it. You drag them all into a room, parade their fears in front of them, and let them walk out. We don't call the cops, don't file charges. We don't even open the flash drive. What did we actually solve?" Wolfe wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and studied me. "Justice is not always served hot, Archie. Sometimes it is set before you and left to cool on its own terms." I set my fork down. Tyne walked. "For now." "You think he'll try again?" "No," Wolfe said calmly. "Because now he doesn't know what we know, or what we intend to do with it. The game has changed. He's no longer in pursuit. He's being watched." I thought about that. He's dangerous. Yes, but exposed. The bullet through the photograph was the beginning of a purge. He intended to finish it quietly. But now every name in Lang's files is aware, awake, and wary. That is more effective than any prosecution. They will cover their own backs, and they will keep him in check. I poured myself a small glass of wine from the carafe Fritz had left. "So what happens to the drive?" "It stays," Wolfe said. "It remains sealed, indexed, and archived." "In case someone else tries to stir the ashes?" "In case the fire rekindles," he murmured. I sipped. Lang was a son of a gun, planning this posthumous dance just so his ghost could keep control. "Control, yes," Wolfe said. "But also, legacy. He knew his influence would fade. He left behind a mechanism to ensure he was remembered. Not fondly, but undeniably. Hell of a way to make people mourn you." Wolfe shook his head. "He didn't care for mourning. He cared for memory, and he ensured it by making himself unforgettable. For better or worse." I let that hang in the air for a moment, then asked what had been scratching the back of my brain for days. "You knew from the beginning, didn't you, that it wasn't about the photograph?" "I suspected," he said. "A single bullet, no ransom, no message. The image wasn't the message. The choice of target was. A surgical shot, meant to suggest control. And Lang? He was the only one in that picture who couldn't respond, which meant someone wanted to silence a conversation that hadn't yet started. Brodsky? Too scared. Dean? Too cold. Kessler? Too careful. Elise? Wolfe hesitated, then gave a small nod. Too smart to do it herself, but not above suggesting it be done. I whistled. "You think she pushed Tyne?" "I think she knew where to nudge and whom to trust with dirty work. She saw the danger in Lang's archive and quietly signaled that something ought to be done. She may never have lifted a hand, but she held the match. And Tyne lit it." Wolfe sipped from his beer, which had gone warm. He didn't seem to mind. "He's been cleaning up elite reputations for a decade. A photograph here, a file there. This was no different. Until it was." I nodded toward the office. "And now?" Wolfe didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, "Now he retreats." Quietly. And those 4, Dean, Kessler, Brodsky, Elise, they stay in orbit. Separate but connected. Each one knows the others carry knowledge that could be lethal if used poorly. So none will use it. Equilibrium. Until someone tips the scale. Wolfe offered the faintest of smiles. By then, we will be ready. Dinner ended in silence, punctuated only by Fritz clearing the dishes and mumbling something in German that I caught half of and chose not to translate. When Wolfe rose and returned to the office, I followed, not quite done with my own inventory of thoughts. The safe was still there, closed again, but not relocked. The flash drive sat in a small lacquered box on Wolfe's desk, labeled with nothing more than a single gold sticker. I wondered how many lives had just been reshaped by a man no longer alive to witness the ripples. Wolfe looked at me once more. Archie, in the morning, send a note to Joy Linwood. Inform her that Lang's legacy has been resolved. What about protection? She no longer needs it. Tyne will not come after her. Not when he knows we kept the original and that we are not alone in knowing its contents exist. I stood by the door and glanced once more at the closed safe. So that's it? For now. You're not going to forget this one, are you? No, Wolfe said very quietly. Because I was in that photograph too. I turned, confused. You weren't. Number. But the man who fired the bullet thought I was. That stopped me. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and exhaled. He knew we would be drawn in, that I would not let such a disruption go unanswered. He fired the shot not to erase Lang's past, but to draw out its future, and he succeeded. So you're saying this was a test? No, Wolfe murmured. A message. To us? To me. That silenced the room. After a moment, Wolfe opened his eyes, stared at the safe, and said with a quiet finality, "And I have answered it." The morning after Wolfe said the case had been a message, to him no less. I sat at my desk with a mug of lukewarm coffee and the vague, persistent sensation that something was still hanging in the air. Not unfinished exactly, just suspended. Like a stage curtain half lowered while the actors waited behind it, still breathing. I'd already sent the note to Joy Linwood. Short, clean and vague enough to soothe without exposing the particulars. Wolfe had dictated it himself, of course. I dropped it at a discreet messenger service instead of trusting email, just to avoid any curious eyes along the digital highway. When I got back, Wolfe was already in the plant rooms. Not unusual, but something about the fact that he hadn't rung for me all morning set off a little alarm in my gut. Around noon, he descended. I heard the elevator, then the soft creak of the office chair. When I walked in, he was staring at a single piece of paper on his desk, not reading it, just watching it like it might decide to speak first. He didn't look up as he said, "Archie, you recall the envelope from Lang marked Barry?" Hard to forget, he didn't exactly seem flattered by the contents. I burned the others. I saw the ashes. But I did not burn that one. I stepped closer. You kept it? I wanted to understand the man, not just expose him. There's a difference. Wolfe gestured to the envelope, still sealed. And I believe now it contains the reason the bullet was fired. I waited, but he didn't open it. I asked, "You planning to do more than stare at it?" His eyes moved up, finally. I believe Lang gave Tyne a choice, and Tyne chose wrong. You mean Lang warned him? In a way, only Lang could. I suspect this envelope contains not just evidence, but an ultimatum. A private one. A final offer of salvation. Sent after the photograph? No, Wolfe said. Before. I let that settle. Then the shot wasn't to protect him from exposure. It was revenge. Exactly, Wolfe said and tapped the envelope. Lang offered him something. Tyne refused and retaliated. Not to silence Lang, but to erase the reminder of what he rejected. That gave me a chill. There's a certain clarity in Wolfe's logic that makes even revenge sound clinical. You want me to read it? No, Wolfe said gently. I want you to deliver it. To Tyne? Yes. Now? No. he said. "Tonight. You'll find him at his secondary residence, West End Avenue, near 90th. Top floor. He's returned there quietly. Saul confirmed it. And you want me to knock on the door and hand him the ghost of Arthur Lang? I want you to give him a choice he refused once, to see if the second time matters." I rubbed my jaw. "That's a hell of a gamble." "Not a gamble," Wolfe said. "A test, and perhaps a lesson." I pocketed the envelope, still sealed, still heavy with things unsaid, and nodded. "Anything else?" "If he refuses to open it," Wolfe said, "do not leave it." "Understood." It was past 8 when I arrived at Tyne's building. Tall, modern, glass that reflected the river like it was trying to deny it. I took the elevator to the top floor, stepped out into a hallway too quiet for comfort, and found the apartment marked only with a brushed steel plaque. No number. Just Tyne. I knocked. It took a full minute before he opened the door, barefoot, no jacket, a drink in one hand, and an expression like he'd been halfway through rewriting his own history. He didn't speak, just looked at me. "Delivery," I said, and held out the envelope. He didn't reach for it. "Lang left this for you. Wolfe thought you should have the second chance," Lang intended. "Still nothing. I don't care if you open it, but I'm not leaving without knowing it's in your hands." He took it. Finally. Held it between 2 fingers, like it might burn. "Was this Wolfe's idea of punishment?" he asked, voice low. "No," I said. "It's his idea of an answer." I turned and left. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair with a glass of sherry and no expression. "Well?" he asked. "He took it. Did he open it?" "Not while I was there." "Good," Wolfe said. "That's better." "Better? Guilt needs no witnesses." I sat, poured myself the end of the sherry, and watched him watching the quiet. "You think he'll change?" "No." "Then what was the point?" Wolfe looked at me and said, with something approaching sadness, to remind him that he could. That was the end of it. Not the case. Not the danger. Just the part where the curtain really does fall and no one claps because no one was supposed to. Lang got what he wanted. His truth lingered. Not loud, not famous, but carved into the quiet corners of 5 lives that would never again sit comfortably in the same room. And Wolfe? He never mentioned the case again. 2 days later, the safe was gone. Saul moved it to an undisclosed location. The drive remained locked away, unlabeled, unread. I asked Wolfe once, weeks later, if he'd ever look at it. He only said, "If the past needs me, it will call again." Until then, we returned to routine. Roast duck, footstools, silence, and the sound of one bullet echoing through a photograph no longer hanging on any wall, but burned into the memory of everyone who saw it, shattered. That was the end of the bullet that broke the photograph, and the man who wanted to live in its frame forever. The last snow of the season arrived that Sunday. It came down lightly, too warm to stick, just enough to blur the windows and make the city feel muffled, like it was holding its breath. I'd just finished updating our records and closing the file on Arthur Lang's posthumous performance when Wolfe rang for me. He was in his chair, naturally. A fresh beer sat on the tray beside him, unopened. He hadn't picked up a book. He wasn't inspecting the orchids. He was simply sitting. That was never casual with Wolfe. When he did nothing, it meant something. "You finished the report?" he asked, without looking over. "All but the ribbon. It's typed, signed, and sanitized for polite company." "Good." I waited. When nothing came, I walked over and sat across from him. "You're sure it's done?" I asked. No loose threads. No hidden motives tucked behind that mirror we missed? Wolfe made a sound, part sigh, part grunt. "There are always threads, Mr. Goodwin, but Lang's have been cut. The bullet was an attempt at erasure. It failed. His shadow remains, but it no longer moves." Tyne's quiet. As he should be. And the others? They will live carefully. That is its own kind of sentence. I leaned forward. You never told me what was in Tyne's envelope, or if he ever opened it. He hasn't returned it, Wolfe said, which is an answer of its own. I paused. But you read it, didn't you? He didn't reply, which meant yes. I waited another beat. So what was Lang's final play? Wolfe looked at me then, his eyes sharp but not unkind. A mirror, Archie. Not just for Tyne, for all of them, for us. Lang was not a great man, but he understood how fear shapes memory. He knew that in the absence of guilt, the only thing more haunting is the truth you choose to forget. He lifted the beer and opened it with one hand, slowly. I didn't pursue this case to expose a killer, he said. I pursued it to restore the record. The photograph was not merely broken, it was revised. A fiction in a frame. And now? Wolfe drank, set the glass down. Now it is what it always should have been. A collection of people caught in the act of pretending they were something else. Outside, the snow lightened, drifting like ash. I stood, stretched, and walked toward the door. Wolfe's voice stopped me. One more thing, Archie. I turned. He raised his eyes to meet mine. Thank you. That one landed. Not because it was rare, though it was, but because it came without ceremony, without preamble. Just a man who had solved something deeper than a case, and knew it, and needed someone else to know he knew it. I nodded and left him there, alone with his orchids, his beer, and the quiet. The safe was gone. The photograph was gone. But the image, still there. And maybe that was the real justice. Because even when a bullet shatters the glass, it doesn't erase the reflection, 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 erase the reflection.